Welcome to Lemongrass Live. I'm Zane, the solution architect at Lemongrass, and across the table from me is my colleague Chris. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're not pitching a product. We're not listing a feature list or anything like that. We want to talk to people who have been quietly handed the SAP estate over the last year or two and are wondering what they've inherited.
Right, you are, Zane. So the audience I keep meeting at the moment is perhaps an infrastructure lead or a platform engineering manager, a cloud architect, or a head of engineering who's used to running everything except SAP. They had the whole IT estate under their purview. SAP is this special little bit in the corner. It had its own team, its own language, its way of doing things. And now, in many of the organizations I'm speaking to, they've changed things around. Cloud is becoming more foremost. SAP is being seen as another application under that existing IT team, and it's getting folded into the wider organization. So these teams who have gone miles ahead in many ways of what SAP's been doing in the IT world with CI/CD and all the new concepts, now have these SAP systems to look after, and it is special. Things don't quite work the same way. And at the same time, they're learning about all this special SAP lingo and the ways of doing things and how things do or do not work in the SAP world. SAP is pushing them for decisions about RISE, end of life, S4, clean core, BTP, it's a business technology platform, business data cloud, AI, all of it, right? It's all coming at once. And they don't necessarily have the background to help decide and decode what SAP is actually proposing.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what we're really going to be talking about today. Bringing SAP into the wider IT fold. So what we aim to do is we'll cover why this consolidation is happening, what does make SAP genuinely different from a CRDC sort of environment and a data perspective, and why this is probably the biggest disruption SAP has been through since R3 in 1992. And where RISE actually sits in that bigger picture. So, well, let's get into it.
Let's start with the org chart, because that's what's driving a lot of the conversations we're having with customers. Why are SAP teams being absorbed into the wider IT engineering group? Why now? Why is this happening at this moment in time?
There's a few different things that are all kind of happening at the same time. So firstly, there's financial pressure. SAP teams have historically been quite expensive, ring-fenced units. They've operated separately from the rest of IT. They've had their own rules and being able to do kind of their own thing. And CFOs are looking at headcount and saying, well, why is the basis function and a Linux function sitting in two completely different cost centers? Shouldn't they, aren't they synergistic? Shouldn't they sit together? So there's that. And secondly, there's the move to cloud. I mean, once an SAP estate is sitting on a hyperscaler, that sort of muscle memory of what the wider infrastructure team does on a hyperscaler suddenly becomes a lot more relevant. So the people that are looking after other applications on cloud are saying, well, why do we have a separate team patching SUSE for the SAP system on cloud when there's already a team patching, Linux of all flavors, but for everything else on that same cloud environment? Why should these be separate in the first place?
And let's not forget about the talent market and the talent pool in SAP, right? A lot of people who built these estates 20 years ago are the same people who work today as basis leads, infrastructure leads, senior SAP ops people, and so on. They're brilliant, right? But they're getting closer to retirement. There are fewer of them coming through. And arguably, the shift they now need to make to the newer SAP technologies is perhaps maybe easier from an outside IT background than it is to skill up with BTP, BDC, all the clouds, the new stuff for these people who have been around for a long time. If you could even find them, because they're getting fewer in number. So consolidating into a broader engineering group and cross-training for many organizations is possibly a more cost-effective, easier, and perhaps even in some cases the only viable path forward. And unless, of course, you look at things like maybe some AI automation agentic capability, but perhaps that's for a Lemongrass Live another day.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the skills issue is really important. And what I'll add is the move is rational on paper, bringing these, SAP and non-SAP teams together, but can be quite disruptive in practice for those teams. The receiving team gets handed an estate that just doesn't behave, like a modern IT architecture does, what they've come to expect. Doesn't have the same, separation of code, logic, data, and so on. It's all bundled together. Everything sits in the database in an SAP environment, and that's just not what people are used to if they're in that that sort of web hyperscaler type of environment. So the platform team that's been deploying with Terraform, GitHub Actions, blue green A/B testing, all those sort of modern engineering patterns and approaches, is suddenly handed this relatively a monolithic SAP environment. So they open up a transport request and they go, what?
So I was once a junior basis consultant, and I remember pressing the big lorry, which is a joke
Oh,
for the SAP people listening.
not the
Don't
big
do
lorry.
that. But that's exactly the point. There's all this little SAP insider esoteric knowledge stuff that makes perfect sense if you've grown up with SAP, been in the ecosystem for decades, but makes almost no sense if you're coming from a modern engineering background. And this is the story I hear again and again. Customers say, we thought we'd just bring SAP into the existing tooling, and then it doesn't work. They realize the existing tooling assumes a lot of things that simply aren't true for SAP.
Okay. Well, give me a specific example then, Chris.
Well, the biggest one is the assumption that code lives in Git and gets promoted through environments via a pipeline. In the SAP world, a lot
Mhm.
of code changes, particularly ABAP changes, have historically lived in what I described before, the SAP transport management system, where you have the little lorry and the big lorry. You have a queue of transports. They move from development to QA to production, which are all different systems, independently hosted on different VMs. They move in order. It's controlled, robust, and very audit friendly, which is the main thing about SAP is the central ERP for most organizations. But it doesn't fit very naturally into a pull request model. So the receiving team has to decide, do we leave SAP on its own change process and accept that it's a parallel universe, or do we try and bridge it into the wider CI CD story? But both are possible, both can be valid, but both come with trade-offs.
And essentially neither answer is automatically right or wrong, but you do have to pick deliberately and carefully. It is genuinely hard to make a traditional SAP environment work in that modern CI/CD pull, merge, etc. environment. Can be done, but it's very, very tricky. The worst outcome though is sort of the in-between option. The engineering team, thinks it owns SAP change, CI/CD, or whatever you call it there. But the SAP is still managing transports in the old way, and nobody talks about it. And that gets especially difficult. So if you have a change that spans SAP and something outside, for example, a change to the web shop, and then a change in ABAP that supports an API that the web shop needs to call, and those two changes need to go through together from development through to production testing and sign-offs and so on, as part of a single business release.
Exactly. And that's where change coordination can get messy very quickly. But maybe let's move on to another topic. Let's talk about data. It's probably the biggest one.
Mm-hmm.
The way SAP handles data is a culture shock if you come from the world of Postgres, Snowflake, data lakes, and modern architectural platforms. In these modern worlds, you think of the database as a place where rows, columns, objects live, and you pull them out and use them somewhere else. Or maybe with unstructured data, maybe it's slightly different. But SAP data isn't like this. It carries hierarchies, organizational structures, fiscal use, units of measure, currency conversions, over time relevancy with dates baked in a different way than you might do with the versioning in a data lake architecture. Hundreds of business rules baked into the data and application layer. A lot of it is time dependent. A lot of it's configuration dependent. A lot of it exists because SAP is designed to support auditability and process control, not just the storage of business data. So being able to take that data out of SAP and rebuild it all and rebuild all the meaning somewhere else is hard. It's really hard, and it's usually for the customers who do manage to achieve it very expensive to build and maintain.
So a good example of that is monetary values that are sitting in the currency. So a revenue or pricing figure in SAP is not just a number with a currency attached. It's a number with a currency, a conversion type, a date of validity, maybe a group currency translation. There might be a spread, there might be a set of rules about which rate applies at which point in time, and so on. So if you just access the table data, pull out the currency value for a particular product or whatever, and you expect to just understand that as a value of that point in time, you can get a technically correct answer out the database, but commercially it's the wrong thing. Whereas if you go through the SAP application layer or through the API, which is what SAP says you should always be doing anyway, then you are accessing it through that functional, that business logic. Uses the right currency logic, works out which date you were referring to, make sure that you get the right conversion for the right part of the business, and so on. And then you get the reasonable, sensible, correct answer for that particular query. And that can be quite a hard shift for teams that are used to maybe slightly more simplistic data that you can get with a direct table access.
100%. And look, we've all seen recently on LinkedIn all these posts about SAP controlling now the access on agent API calls and also data API calls. And I think I certainly expect that to become more and more controlled, so that you are required to go through those formal routes, and it isn't even an option to pull everything out. But let's talk about another area in the data. So cubes and aggregates are another good example. BW, BPC, so Business Warehouse, which is the warehousing platform of SAP. BPC, the budgeting, planning, consolidation tool within SAP, which is about controlling that process area, and the various SAP analytics layers exist because the operational model is not shaped for reporting. So you often end up with two systems: the transactional system, so your ECC or ERP system or S4 system, and the system that looks at the analytical layer, so a process layer and analytical layer, in a way that's used for reporting. A modern data engineering team might look at this and say, why don't we just stream all that data to our lakehouse and use this as the analytical platform? But then they discover that streaming that SAP data loses the semantic layer, not only with all the business rules, but the way in which the aggregates and cubes are built up to be able to do the analysis against those attributes in a way that tends not to be possible or easy in a lakehouse or wider data platform. So you have to use the SAP stuff to get something you can use, generate as a data product, and then consume in your lakehouse elsewhere.
Yeah, so that intermediate layer is actually really important, and especially as some of the older SAP analytical products that you mentioned are coming towards their end of life, and customers need something else to fill that gap. So that's why things like SAP DataSphere and the Business Data Cloud are becoming increasingly important. SAP recognizing that semantic layer has to travel with the data. You can't just strip it out and expect the meaning of the data to survive.
Exactly. The buzzwords everyone's hearing are things like zero copy, data products, SAP DataSphere, Business Data Cloud, and connectors into platforms like Snowflake, BigQuery, Microsoft Fabric, and so on. The point, though, isn't really the buzzwords. The point is that SAP is trying to solve a very real problem. How do you make the SAP data available in a modern data mesh or lakehouse paradigm without losing all of the meaning? So you don't have to rebuild everything SAP is in your analytical platform. You could just take the results of the query and use it out when that's relevant. And when customers get that right, the value is huge. It's really meaningful and significant. We've seen customers gain a lot of agility and business value by using these tools properly and adding to their bottom line and reducing their TCO in the process.
Right. So that covers data. What else catches people out?
Yeah, well, you can't talk about what catches people out in SAP without thinking about the commercial model. SAP licensing is entirely its own discipline. If you thought Microsoft licensing was complex, SAP licensing is a different world again. Indirect access is the classic one that catches engineering teams out and catches engineering teams out to sort of 7-figure sums. It's huge and extremely complicated. You build a perfectly innocent integration, as an example, maybe a customer front end posts an order to S4. From an engineering point of view, it's elegant, API first, decoupled, modern. Then later, SAP looks at that flow and says, every customer who triggered one of these orders created a digital access document, and here's a bill. So for large organizations, that can add up to a very large number very, very quickly.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You can have clever software developers doing the right thing using APIs in front of SAP, and they have no idea that they're creating a licensing exposure when they're doing it. The product works; it's fantastic, and you only really notice later in the chain. Maybe the SAP side of the equation doesn't even realize it until you come to an audit or a renewal or some sort of change to your SAP license, and SAP wants to do an audit. So it's not in the cloud certification. It's not normal developer training to say, oh, I'm writing this piece of code, I should check the license. It's SAP specific knowledge, and typically it's the sort of knowledge that you learn either being burned yourself or someone who's been burned has warned you.
Yeah, with a lot of software vendors, you get a usage report. With SAP, you get an auditor, right? The audit cycle has its own cadence and its own evidence requirements. If your engineering team has refactored the user model or routed activity through service accounts or built integrations without understanding the license implications, you can find yourself in a very challenging commercial position. So the key point is it's much better to get in front of these problems before a buying decision like Rise is forced upon you. If SAP finds something in an audit, just you're trying to negotiate a transformation deal, your commercial leverage evaporates.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen that. Customers negotiating with SAP, they think they're on the front foot. They're trying to negotiate a better deal. Maybe it's a move from ECC to S4 or going into Rise, and then an audit issue appears, and suddenly the conversation becomes about concessions rather than the customer getting extra value. So I mean, if I'm in the wider engineering team and I've just inherited an SAP environment, what are the top three things I need to know?
Well, I mean, the first one, obviously, don't get rid of your SAP people, even if the org chart and reorg activity says you can. The institutional knowledge is gold. The cost of losing it is much higher than the headcount savings. The second thing I would say is that cross-training in both directions. So you want to take your best SAP people and put them into the org, and you want to take your best people from outside of SAP and help them understand the SAP world. Send your SAP people on cloud training, CI/CD training, AI training, modern engineering training, and your cloud and engineer people on SAP fundamentals. They need to understand the SAP world, not just the infra underneath it, so it extends to the layers above. And then the third, just because of the exposure and risk, I would get external help on licensing and audit. If there's only one thing you go to external parties for, that is what I would go to them for. It's quite a specialist field. It's not expensive in the context of what it can save you, especially as the commercial model changes as you move to Rise. It almost always pays for itself many times over in that context, and your buyers are going to thank you when they sit down with SAP and negotiate from a position of knowledge and strength rather than from a position of weakness.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with all of that, Chris. And I might actually add a fourth. Build a single source of truth for the change that you're doing. So, for example, whatever pipeline you end up with, every change to the SAP estate has to be visible in the same dashboard or governance process or whatever that the engineering team is using for everything else. So you've got to bring it back together. Otherwise, SAP just becomes a black box again.
I completely agree. And I think that nicely brings us back to one of the opening points of our conversation today. We've talked about why organizations are now bundling SAP into the wider world of IT. And we mentioned there about this happening at the exact same moment that the world of SAP is going through the biggest change, certainly I've experienced in my career with SAP since the R3 in 1992. It's one of the biggest changes in SAP history.
Bigger than R3?
Comparable to R3, I'd say, if not bigger. The shift from mainframe to client server, which is the R3 bit that Zayn and I are talking about in 1992, was a complete rethink about how SAP software was deployed and consumed. And you can still feel the echoes of that today, even in the tool. So if you go to upgrade SAP today, even if you're on S4, you go to R3 up as the transaction, which tells you how dramatic a shift and how much that's flown through in the product to now. We're moving from on-premise software or installed on VMs, even if those VMs are in the cloud, towards a SaaS ERP model with SAP now. So the idea is we shouldn't be running what they would term on-premise or private edition solutions. It's managed differently, it's licensed differently, it's operated differently. Architecturally, though, it's a lot closer to other applications that customers buy in a SaaS model today. So SAP is moving from quite a special world to a more generic modern world that maybe some of those other teams will find more familiar. That change is not complete, though. It's taking progress today. I don't know a lot of enterprise customers that today can run their ERP core system, their finance system, as a SaaS solution right now, but that's the direction we're going in. SAP wants customers to move to standardized SaaS solutions so they can get the innovation out every quarter. make sure people are upgraded quickly. They're always on the latest innovation, especially with the pace of technology and how quickly benefits can be derived. And you see it already in the line of business solutions and the acquisitions that SAP has made in SuccessFactors, Concur, Ariba, Fieldglass, and it's the way that all SAP services will go in the future around an ERP core.
Yeah. So essentially, what SAP is doing is they are decomposing that historic monolithic core where everything was sitting in ECC. They're breaking it out into these. So let's talk about that a little bit more. How's that actual decomposition happening?
Well, the buzzword, and I love my buzzwords, Zane, is clean core. The branding has been quite consistent from SAP on that one. So SAP wants customers to move away from a world where they've customized their SAP system and that code lives inside the ERP database to a place where instead that is sat alongside SAP. In the old model, customers put code directly into SAP. They copied reports, modified standard transports, added bespoke logic. You might use user exits following the guide, but it's still in the system. And the uniqueness has helped businesses, right? They chose SAP because they could customize it and get that uniqueness of their business baked into their central tool. But not all of it is needed today. It's difficult to manage. It's difficult to catalog. Every time you upgrade SAP, you have to go through all that custom stuff and make sure it doesn't break and it doesn't break the other stuff in the system. So it takes a long time. And there's a lot of these. Enterprise customers tend to have thousands, sometimes tens or hundreds of thousands of these customizations sitting in their system. So it can take an upgrade cycle that with a vanilla SAP system might be a weekend. And indeed, some customers who have a clean core, it is a weekend now, and extend that to 9 months. So it has a dramatic impact on your ability to be able to upgrade your system and act with agility. It doesn't really fit where the software is going. So the idea of a SaaS model inherently means you can't build it into the core. SAP is solving it by having this clean core idea. So your SaaS software sits on one side, but you still have those special bits. You put them on their business technology platform, and you have API contracts with the core that you can then use for your innovation. The side-by-side platform, business technology platform, BTP.
Right. And that matters because it changes what the core actually is, right? So once the core is standardized, SAP can release changes to it more like a true SaaS product. So, regular updates to the software, less infrastructure exposure, less customer specific variations, less dependency on customer custom code, and so on. So, I mean, in SAP's mind, the S/4HANA Public Cloud Edition is the direction of travel. That's the very standardized SaaS model of an ERP that SAP provides. But RISE isn't that destination, right? RISE is the on-ramp.
100%, and it can be confusing. Let's make sure that we don't add to that and just make it clear. So RISE is just a commercial model and rehosting your SAP estate with SAP. That's all RISE is. But RISE is also SAP's on-ramp for you to go on that journey to the SaaS software. They see it as the first step in that cloud journey. They'll offer you incentives for clean core, for example, and the reason is that they want you to get to that destination. It works for a lot of large SAP customers. I think if you are coming from a place where you have tens or hundreds of thousands of customizations, expecting you in any short frame of time to move to a SaaS ERP system that is not yet that widely adopted is unrealistic. But SAP is seeing this as a multi-year journey, working with organizations in order to help them get to that place where they can be on one single code base sometime in early 2030s in order to be able to deliver this solution. It's a transitional state, but you have to, at least SAP will increasingly push you harder to make that first step.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, the reason that RISE exists is because those large organizations can't go from where they are today to public cloud SaaS in one step. They need that sort of interim place, where they can have that interim step. The custom code comes out, integrations can be reworked, data's cleaned, operating model changes, all those sorts of things. So essentially what happens is RISE gives you that managed environment. You've gone from your on-prem maybe to a hyperscaler into RISE, which is within the SAP fold. You have that managed environment, you do that clean core work and so on. SAP takes the operational burden, but the work still has to be done, and there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and it bears restating. Rise does not magically clean your core. It doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't modernize your integration estate. It doesn't automatically make your data ready for BDC, for Business Data Cloud. It gives you a platform and it gives you a commercial construct in which you can start doing those things.
Right. Okay. So that's the Rise part. Let's talk a little bit about BTP itself, because that decomposed architecture we talked about means more than just, take your custom code and move it somewhere else, right? Walk me through what that actually looks like.
Sure. So SAP BTP, SAP Business Technology Platform, which has gone through many names over the years, is SAP's platform as a service environment. It runs the side-by-side extensions, so the custom code you're writing. So if you have custom functionality that historically sat inside your SAP system and you want to keep it because it's a differentiator for your business, clean core direction is to move that out to BTP. And there are, SAP says you can have clean core with it still in the system, but ideally what you're doing is moving it out to BTP. It also has several other services. The main one that most people are using is the integration services. It provides data analytics alongside Business Data Cloud, and there is indeed a collapsing of those teams that we expect to be announced soon, if not already, and where AI capabilities such as Joule sit in within the broader SAP architecture. So the platform is clear, the pattern's clear, that you've got the clean core S4 in the middle, BTP, BDC wrapped around it as the extension, integration, and data layer, and then loosely coupled set of services to the core with well-defined APIs and events.
Right, and I think the key word there is, or key phrase is loosely coupled, right? In the old world, an extension might have been, say for example, a modification to a standard transaction, or a copy of a standard R report. Copy an R report, create a Z version, and then you tweak it, and then you tell people run this report instead of that report, and that makes those extensions very tightly coupled to the specific SAP release you were on at the time you made a copy of the standard SAP program and tweaked it. So that meant there was always a risk that when you did an upgrade or a patch, the code would break. Something would be incompatible and it just wouldn't work. It might not compile or whatever. So the loosely coupled model essentially says the extension lives outside the core and talks to the core SAP environment through a stable set of APIs, the way that modern software architecture works. So the contract between the systems matters more than how the internal implementation works on either side. So that's what enables you to upgrade the core without breaking everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just microservices thinking, but applied to SAP's ERP product. Yeah, event-driven API first. In a sense, SAP is becoming more like the rest of the modern IT world. That's why the consolidation we talked about earlier can be a good thing in the long run. The skills that a modern engineering team have are the skills that are being now built in the SAP architecture and what it increasingly needs.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, the challenge is that transition phase, how to get there. So you've got an estate, your SAP estate built on an old paradigm, and then you've got an architectural pattern that SAP has that's pulling it towards that new paradigm. But for most organizations, you're going to have to operate in both worlds at the same time, and potentially for quite a long time.
And yeah, exactly. And I hear a lot of people be critical about this, but I think we need to be fair to SAP. Part of the reason it's taking longer than some other platforms is because SAP is the system of record for all of the largest companies in the world. It runs finance, it runs supply chain, it's the process behind auditable financial data. It's not the sort of platform where you can just throw in a production change 10 times a day and hope for the best. It would crash the world. It's why SAP is one of the most trusted tools anywhere. But the market is changing, AI is accelerating. People tell me software is approaching zero cost, and I think some moats are bigger than others, right? But business expectations are changing. The pressure to modernize is much higher. And for many customers, this is the biggest change SAP will have seen in 20 years. For me, having worked in the sector, this is the biggest change I have seen in 20 years.
It kind of almost feels a bit like another Y2K sort of problem building up.
Yeah, except for this time it might actually go bang.
Right. Well, let's bring it back to the practical decisions then, because somebody that's listening to us has been asked, or probably soon will be asked, to sign or maybe refuse to sign or negotiate a RISE contract with SAP. So what should they actually be evaluating?
I mean, with anything like this, there are three lenses, right? Commercial, operational, and strategic. Commercial one's obvious, and I stressed it earlier on, and the mistakes there are going to show up the fastest and probably be the most dramatic. And it's not just about getting the licensing right, but also thinking about what you're buying, because the services model changes as well as the commercial costs associated with it. And the way in which they're measuring the commercials is different as well. So thinking about what does the contract cover out of the roles and responsibilities, of which there are several hundred, how are we mapping to the consumption model from where our licensing model was before, what's in scope, out of scope, understanding what you're buying and what you're not buying, and making sure you get what you need for a fair price. And that is something I have seen even very, very large organizations handle badly if they don't get specialist advice in that area. Rise bundles infrastructure, basic operations, and some baseline services into a subscription alongside your licensing. So the price depends on so many dimensions, and not all of those are necessarily as black and white as they might first appear. So it's not trivial. Everything's costed differently, and the way SAP measures it can affect can be can lead customers to assume one thing when in fact, if they were to relook at the way in which their licensing and authorization model works, they could have a radically different perspective. So if you only get help in one area, this is the area to get help in, the commercial area. A licensing specialist will be able to provide an accurate view and arm you with what you need going into that. And it, as I say, it almost always pays for itself many, many times over.
Yeah, exactly. Because while it makes sense to bundle, that bundling of the hosting, the operations, the licenses, and so on, everything together, it does cut both ways. So on the one hand, it's very simple and straightforward. You put together infrastructure, operations, licensing. You make it a subscription model. Fewer different vendors that you have to manage, less complex, a cleaner procurement cycle. But if you've got particular operational standards, so for example, you have a particular monitoring tool set or a backup window requirement or security controls, DR patterns that you need for compliance, data retention, that sort of thing. You do have to be quite careful to see what RISE will and will not accommodate in the standard model and even with some of the tweaks and extensions. So, some things can be adjusted. And in some aspects, you will just have to move to the SAP standard because it has to be standardized. And your team needs to understand what that level of flexibility is before they sign anything.
And I think we're already discussing the second area naturally, right? This is the operational facet. So who does what, RACI, definition, standard stuff. In your own environment, you probably manage everything from the infrastructure all the way through the DB stack to the application, and that changes. Under RISE, SAP takes a lot of that ownership, so they're owning what the hyperscaler would have owned and also the layer of infrastructure, DB and OS you owned previously. And you get some, they also do some of the SAP stuff at the security and basis level, and then you take the other stuff. And now you're still involved in many of those things SAP are doing, but now you're involved through talking to SAP through tickets, which is almost it's a very different skill set to doing the changes yourself. So it's detailed. It's not always the easiest to understand. Some experience is normally very valuable, maybe with a first system before moving with the rest of your estate. And sometimes customers really benefit from external help in this area as well, although this is absolutely something many enterprise customers do very well themselves. It's not, I've seen some people stand on stage and say SAP will do everything now, you don't need a basis team, and that is definitely not true. You do need to understand what SAP will do, what you'll do, and what the reality is like on the ground, and you may choose to use a partner to help you with this bit as well. But don't pick one that only gives you project managers. You do need some technical understanding of what's going on.
Absolutely, yeah. Because that operational change can be quite painful, switching that sort of management model. So as you alluded to, your basis team doesn't necessarily just disappear. It's probably a bad idea. You still need people within the customer fold that understands SAP and understands the system and the business together. That's a valuable set of skills and knowledge. And in some ways, that actually matters more because their job shifts from doing everything directly in the system to governing a service that is hosted by SAP and operated by SAP, potentially with other partners. Raising tickets, managing escalations, interpreting service levels, keeping the business moving. But the people that are used to having root access or SAPL when when the going gets tough, they have to get used to a different model. That's just not the case anymore once you move into that RISE operational fold. It is a genuine operational change, not just a switch of your hosting partner.
Yeah, and pinpointing on one specific example around that is visibility. So in the old model, you could see everything that was going on, and now you're not going to. And even if you get the log, I forget what they're called, but there are log services, I think, where SAP will send you some logs. You still won't get everything. So some of that visibility is just not going to be with you now. And being able to speak to, especially your security team, about what that means and an acceptance of it, and it should be fine, right? SAP is very secure. They have the trust center and everything, but going through that operational change is going to be quite significant for a lot of teams. You need to design for it, and you need to understand what's happening. But that's just one element, right? There's a broad operating model change here. If you don't know the answers to the questions of how those changes are taking place and how you're going to have that design and that process going forward in areas like visibility and others, that operating model will break down very, very quickly. So you need to be prepared for those operational changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Operational is very key. So, I mean, your third lens, as you said, was strategic. So that's the one that's probably skipped the most. So, as we said earlier, RISE isn't the destination, right? If you sign a RISE contract and say, right, I'm done, you'll be having a very similar conversation in 3 or 4, maybe 5 years time. So why do we still have all that same custom code? Why are upgrades still taking so long and so painful and so expensive and need so much business testing and so on? Why aren't we as agile as we thought we would be? Why is it costing us more and not less? And the answer will usually be because you didn't adopt the new model. You moved the hosting, you did the first step, you changed the commercial wrapper, you moved into the RISE hosting, but you didn't actually do anything to fundamentally transform your estate, right? RISE only pays off if you use that interim sort of private cloud period to do the transformational work.
100%. And the positive side of that is that transformational work has never been faster or cheaper to do, because some of these newer tools like generative AI are genuinely useful for this in the past 6 to 12 months or so. And they can do a lot of the heavy lifting on the code analysis, dependency mapping, automated documentation, clean core analysis. So it's never been easier or faster or cheaper to understand what the estate does and how you might move forward and change it. But you still need to have the intent. You still need to understand that RISE is an opportunity for you now to do these things, so that you can access those business AI and business innovations that SAP will offer you should you go through that transformation process. None of it happens automatically. RISE isn't going to do it for you. RISE is not going to, at the moment, baby you along the journey. But what it does do is it gives you a platform that you can build on and make those transformational steps.
Yeah, I mean, so we have seen customers who treat RISE just as a lift and shift. And then, you come to a year or so later and they are frustrated because they haven't achieved the savings they thought they would get. They're not as agile as they thought they would be. The business is still just constrained by SAP processes and change as they always used to be. And, as we just discussed, the reason is simple. They picked up the estate, moved it to a different managed hosting environment with a different set of SLAs and different charging model and a bunch of pain to get there. But didn't actually change anything about how that whole environment worked.
Absolutely, and we've seen a spectrum of other examples as well. So I've seen customers who have been able to adopt AI into their businesses with SAP and BTP without going RISE. And I've seen customers who have gone RISE on the SAP journey as the start of a multi-year transformation program. They take the operational headroom and they invest it in the transformation work. I think the key is the adoption of BTP, BDC, and the newer tools more than the RISE journey that SAP is asking everyone to do. But independent. Don't just stop at doing a lift and shift to RISE. Find a way of getting AI into your business, maybe even before the RISE move, but certainly after, in order to be able to leverage the advantage of the newer technologies in your business, because it really is it works now. It's super valuable and it's helpful, and it can really, the companies who adopt it will survive, I think, and those who are slower will fall behind. Yeah, but the difference, I think, is intent. Some people just go RISE because they're being pushed. Others have an intent to modernize their SAP core ERP architecture in order to be able to take advantage of those newer capabilities.
Yeah, they have a plan, they have a vision. Okay, so let's do a bit of a change of tack. and talk a little bit about FinOps. I mean, this is something that has been important in hyperscale environments for a long time, but even in an SAP RISE world, that's important, because your SAP licensing, your consumption in a RISE world isn't a one-off negotiation right at the start. It is a continuous discipline, and I think sometimes customers miss that they need to bring that through as a regular discipline, because the number of users changes, the user mix changes, the system sizing changes, so grows, reduces, so your consumption changes, third-party products that you plug in change, BTP usage changes, BDC usage changes, AI credits get consumed. There's a lot of different counters that are ratcheting up credits or charges within your RISE estate, and if you don't have a FinOps capability that's watching this, they're modeling it, challenging it, and so on, it's actually quite easy to end up either overcommitted, under licensed, or surprised because something went completely wrong.
And whilst I would build on your existing FinOps team that you've developed over time, it's important to understand that FinOps in modern SAP context is very different from FinOps in a self-managed context on a hyperscaler. On a hyperscaler, you're thinking about reserved instances, savings plans, backups, tiers, storage, so on and so forth. But in RISE, you're not thinking about any of that. You're thinking about consumption units. It used to be in BTP and BDC. I think those are going to be crushed together, and the AI world. And the levers are completely different. You're looking at user groups, entitlement models, integration patterns, BTP consumption, watching out for indirect licensing, data consumption, AI consumption. So it's how the services are used across the estate, making sure you have the right enterprise agreements in place. So it's FinOps, but the levers are not at all the same.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we did a piece on FinOps with Rogan, our FinOps and SAP licensing specialist, some time back. And the headline for me was this: introducing competent FinOps capability before a RISE decision often pays off many times over. We've seen customers save millions by having a clear view of what they actually needed to buy before they signed the RISE contract. And that's much better than signing it and then going, I wish I had.
Exactly. And that is probably where I would land the commercial point. If you don't get advice on anything else, get it on that bit. The move to RISE, BTP, BDC, and SAP is huge technically and operationally, but commercially, it's complicated, and that's where it will bite you first and probably the hardest. If I had to leave everyone with one thought, because I see that we are running short on time, it would be this: RISE is a step, but it's not the destination. It's the first step on that journey. It can be a good first step, but only if you plan for what comes after. If you treat it purely as a procurement exercise to get your systems hosted somewhere else, you're going to carry all of the things you have today into the new model. You're not going to get any advantages out of the new technology. So have a plan for what you're doing next. Understand the lenses, the commercial, operational, and strategic, and what you're going to do when you get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And my thought would be, parallel to do that, don't estimate the cultural side of that change. Your engineering teams that are inheriting SAP often have the right instincts for where the SAP architecture is going. The SAP teams, on the other hand, have the institutional knowledge of the platform and the business and how things work that makes that transition possible and smooth. The organizations that get through this successfully will be the ones that treat the merger of those two disciplines as a partnership rather than a hostile takeover.
Absolutely. I think that's a great note to finish on. So if this is interesting to you and you would like to hear more, Zane and I and Lemongrass more broadly work in this space day in, day out across large enterprises. We're happy to talk to you about wherever you are. If it's getting AI in when you're on premise on ECC, we can help you. And if it's about going through the RISE journey, we can help you as well, wherever you might be. I think there's probably a QR code you can scan on the screen. So give that a zap, and we'd love to have a chat.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you at the next one.
And don't press the big lorry.
Definitely don't press the big lorry.
Bye all.
Bye.